Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is an ongoing series to build a Tier 3 Active Directory Certificates services on Windows Server 2025. In the previous videos, we configured our Active Directory domain controller. We configured and prepared our web server for hosting our CDP and AIA information, and we also configured our offline root CA. In this video, we are going to configure our intermediate CA for our lab. Now, in the previous video, we configured our offline root CA, and we haven't moved the CRL and the certificate of our root CA to our web server. We're going to do that, and before we do that, I want us to configure the intermediate CA, and then we're going to capture some errors, and I'm going to explain why we are seeing those errors, and then we'll finally move our AIA information, which is the certificate, and the CRL to our web server to resolve those issues. All right, so we're going to log into our offline intermediate CA with the local account from the server. So I'm logging in as a local administrator to our offline intermediate CA. Okay. Before I move forward, I want to let you know that I have renamed this server to InterCA. You can do that or just leave it with the generic name that it came with. So I'm going to show you. I renamed this to InterCA. Okay. So we're going to add the Active Directory Certificate Services role. And before we do that, we are going to create a CAPolicy.inf file. Remember, we explained what it is in the previous video. Okay, so you can go back and watch it if you have missed that session of the video. I won't be explaining more of that here. However, the only difference between the CA policy on this CA and our root CA is that we are not going to define how long or the validity period of our base CRL. Okay, so I'm going to create our CA policy.inf, and then I'm also going to view the extensions and make sure that this ends with INF extension instead of this TXT. So I'm going to delete TXT. Okay, right, I'm going to double click on it, and I am going to copy my INF information that I created for this, and I'm going to paste that in there. Okay, so this CA, we want it to be valid for 15 years when it renews, and we haven't defined the validity period of our CRLs like we did in when configuring the offline root CA. So I'm going to save this, and I'm just going to open it one more time just to be sure. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and install our Active Directory Certificate Services role. This shouldn't take us a long time to configure because we already configured the root CA. Is going to be much more similar to this, except that we'll be sending the requests to our offline root CA to sign the CSR. Right. Okay, so our Active Directory Certificate Services role is complete. We are going to finish up the configuration, and I'm going to use my local administrator account. Click on next, and we're going to select certificate authority, and then next, and the setup type is going to be standalone CA, and this is going to be a subordinate CA. And next, and we're going to have it create a private key, and I'm going to leave everything here as default and just click on next. The name of the CA, I'm going to name it People Labs. Can I spell intermediate? Intermediate CA. And now, for the distinguished name, remember earlier on we added our organization. I'm just going to put our domain name here, and then we can do the comparison between the two certificates of this intermediate CA and our our root CA. Okay, so for the request, because we can't submit this request to our CA that is online, we are going to submit the CSR of this CA to our offline route. So I'm going to click on next. This is where we can pick the CSR. If we go to this directory, the C directory, we'll see the CSR here. Okay, so I'm going to click next, and I'm just going to leave everything as default and next, and then click configure. Okay, so now we have the CSR. We can double click to open that, and here we see begin new certificate request and end new certificate request, which is our CSR. So I'm going to pick this, and then we're going to let me copy that instead. Okay, so I'm going to create a network share so that I can be able to move things within this lab. Usually in an enterprise environment, because these things are offline, you can use a USB key to pick this request and submit it to the offline root CA to sign the certificate, and then you can pick the signed certificate and install it on your offline intermediate CA. But in our case, this is a lab environment. We can use a file share to basically move files around. I intended to create a file share for my own lab, just a basic file share for my lab that I'll be using to create different stuff. It's not only PKI that I'll be learning about in this lab. I'm going to do so many different stuff. So I'm just going to share this folder, and I'm going to allow everyone, this is my own lab, to have read and write permissions. Okay, so if I go to this directory, I can move files to that location. Okay, so now if I go to our intermediate CA, I've copied this. So if I go to dco1/file, I can paste that certificate signing request here. And then now let's go back to our root CA. Remember, I intentionally didn't run some commands, and one of the commands that I didn't run was to define how long an issued certificate from this certificate authority is going to be valid for. So by default it's going to be 1 year, so we expect this certificate that we're going to issue to be 1 year, and then after that we're going to run the command to extend that request to 15 years. We want our intermediate certificate to be valid for 15 years. Okay, so we're going to submit a new request, and I am going to go to our file share, CO1, and then I'm going to select this. Now if I come to pending request, we should see our request that we submitted. I'm going to refresh this. Well, that is too slow. And what is that? Okay. Should I blame this on this being pretty new? Okay. So this is Windows Server 2025. So I was kind of like, okay, maybe this is a bug. Okay. So I'm going to right click on this and then all tags and then issue. And this is our very first certificate that we're issuing. And it's going to be valid for just 1 year. We want this to be valid for how many years? 15 years. So we're going to run a setutil command to define the CA certificates that will be issued from this year, the validity period. Right? So I'm going to open command line as administrator. And I'm going to run this command, setutil command here. I'm going to put this command list in the comments section or the description of this video. So basically, we're setting the registry for any issue certificate to be valid in period. The unit should be 10, and the period itself is going to be in years. Okay, so I'm going to run the second command and then set it to years. So basically, we're saying any issued certificate should be valid for, oh, I said 10. This should be 15 instead. It should be 15 years. Okay, so we can now restart our services of our certificate authority. We can run net stop set svc, and then we can run same thing, but it's going to be start. So basically it has restarted our certificate authority. If you want, you can also click on the CA itself and then click on this to stop it, and then click on this icon to start it. You have basically restarted the CA. Now we can submit the same CSR that we got from our intermediate CA and get a 15 years issued certificate, and that's what we want, right? So I'm going to now submit a new request, but it's going to be the same CSR. So I'm going to copy that. Now go back to our pending request and now issue a new request. Now if I go to our issued certificates, then I refresh this. I don't know why this is glitchy. This is my first time doing this on the Windows Server 2025. Okay, well, our request ID was number 5, so I'm going to double click on it, and we should see a 40-year issued certificate. Okay, so this is issued to Kipo Labs Intermediate CA, and then it's issued by our Kipo Labs Root CA, valid from 2025 to 2045, which is 15 years. Now, if we look at the subject of this intermediate CA, you see we don't have the organization because we didn't define that in the distinguished name when we were configuring this CA. And also, we can take a look at the CRL distribution point. So basically, this is where we can go to download our root CRL, and then this is where we can go to download our AIA information as well. Okay, so now we haven't copied this information to our CDP server, so this won't be accessible, right? And I want us to have some errors before we move the files. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to select PKCS 7. You can choose CRT as well. That should work. Okay, so I'm going to click next, and I'm going to browse, and I want to put it under my network share, and I'm going to change this. Okay, and then next. Now that is exported to our network share. Right. So now if we go back to our intermediate CA, we can now try to install our certificate. Now the very first error we are going to have is the trust chain. Let's try to install it. And then we're going to select this C01 file, and I'm going to double click on this. This should take some time, a little bit of time for it to get everything in place. And we're going to have the trust chain error. And the reason why this is going to happen is because we don't have our root CA installed within the trusted certificate authorities of this local machine store. Okay, so we cannot verify certificate chain. Do you wish to ignore? If I want, I can cancel this out and then install the root CA. That will resolve this first error, but I will ignore this, and then we're going to have the second error. Now let's try to start it one more time. And we're going to have a revocation error. Now it's ignoring validating the chain of the certificate. Now it's going to try to pull the CRL of this issuing CA, and guess where it's looking for that? It's looking for that from PKI http pki.CAPolabs and then / the name of our root CRL. So this is the second error. The revocation function was unable to check revocation because the revocation server was offline, which tells us this CA can download our root CRL information. Okay, so to resolve this issue, we're going to go back to our root CA, and then we are going to copy the CRL of this root CA. Remember, if we open the properties of this root CA and then go to extension, we'll see where it's publishing the CRL information. We can pick that CRL information from there and then move them to our web server. So if we go to Windows System32 set serve set enroll, we should have the name, we should have our root CA CRL. Okay, so I'm going to Windows System32, System32, and then we go to set serve, and then we go to set enroll, and then we have our root CRL and the certificate. So I'm going to pick this. Okay, then I'm going to paste them in here, and then now we're going to go back to our web server, and I'm going to log into our web server to move this file. Okay, let me close this out. Okay, so we go to DC01 and files, and we're going to copy these last two files, the root CA and its CRL. You know what, let's view the extensions. Okay, we have CAPolabs roots ca.crl and then root ca underscore CAPolabs root ca CRT. That's a certificate. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to go to this PC, and remember we created set enroll folder, so we're going to paste them in here. Okay, so now if we go to that website, our issuing CA, now if we go back to our issuing CA and then start it, now it should work because it's able to now download or access this CRL information from this location. So let's go back to our intermediate CA. Okay, so now this works as intended. We have issued our intermediate CA, and we can now go ahead and turn off our root CA. We're basically done with this root CA. So I'm going to turn it off, and then we can now deal with this intermediate CA and our issuing CA. Okay, so let's right click on, let's look at the properties of our issuing, so our intermediate CA. So go to properties, and then we'll take a look at the CRL extension or the CDP distribution point, and then the AIA distribution point as well. And also we'll look at how long the CRLs are valid for. As I said, we haven't defined the CRLs, how long they're going to be valid for when we created the CAPolicy.inf file. So by default, it's going to be 1 week. Okay, so let's take a look at the certificate itself. Okay, so this certificate is valid for 15 years. If we look at the subject of this certificate, we don't have the organization. However, if we look at our root CA and look at the subject, we have some other additional information that we added when we were creating our CA. Okay, so now let's go back to our extensions, and now we want to define where we can access this CA's CRL and AIA information. So this is a offline intermediate CA. So I'm going to remove all these options except the default place where it publishes its CRL. If you want, you can change this, but I'm just going to leave it. Okay, we don't want to publish Delta CRLs. Okay, so I'm going to add new, and I'm just going to do the same thing that we did for our offline root CA, and I'm going to change this to pki.CAPolabs.net. Okay, and I'm going to click OK, and then include in CDP extension of issued certificate, and then include in IDP extension of issued CRLs. Okay, and then we're going to take a look at the AIA information, and then I'm going to remove this and remove this and then remove this. Then we're going to click add, and then we're going to add pki dot labs.net. Okay, and then I want to show you the difference between this. The name is almost the same, however, is the ending. This ends with CRT, and our CDP ends with CRL. That is the main difference between these two URLs. Okay, so we're going to select this and then include in the AIA extension of issued certificates, and then click apply, and then it's going to force restart our certificate authority. Now once this restarts, we'll take a look at the validity period of our CRL. So if I right click on revoke certificates and then go to properties, and then we see here this is valid for only 1 week. Okay, and then it's also published in Delta CRLs. We don't want it to publish Delta CRLs. So we want this to be valid for just 1 year. Okay, so I'm going to click apply, and then if we look at the issued CRL, the default issue CRL when this was built, we should see a 1 week validity period. Okay, so effective May 25th to June 2nd. That's exactly 1 week. Now, if we publish new CRL, it should be valid for one year. Okay, so now let's publish our new CRL so that we can pick the 1 year validity. So we can pick the 1 year validity. So we can pick the 1 year CRL of our intermediate CA. Okay, so this has been published. We'll go back to the location where we can pick this information. Alright, so we go to Windows, then we go to System 32, and go to Set Save, and then Set Enroll, and then this was when it published the first Delta CRLs that we didn't need. I unchecked that. And if you look at the base CRL, when we publish the CRL, you look at the dates, they are completely different. Right? So let's delete this and try to publish new CRL. We shouldn't see Delta CRLs being published. Right? Let's publish that. This is our third CRL now. And if we refresh here, we don't see Delta CRLs being published. Now, the reason why this published Delta CRLs was because our CAPolicy.inf file didn't have that option that says don't publish Delta CRLs. So our root CA didn't publish Delta CRLs, but this one did. So we have to uncheck that by ourselves. So that's why we see the Delta CRLs being published. So I'm going to now copy this, and then we're going to place them under our share file and paste that in here. Now, if we go back to our web server, we can copy those information and put them here so that our issuing CA and other services can access both our offline root CRL and AIA information, and also our offline intermediate CA's CRL and AIA information. DC. Okay. Then I'm going to copy our intermediate intermediate CRL and intermediate certificate, and then go back and then paste them here. Okay. So if we look at the intermediate CRL, they are valid for exactly 1 year. And if we look at the roots, they are valid for 2 years. Okay. So now the last command that we're going to run is to define how long issued certificate from this CA are going to be valid for. Remember, we intentionally issued 1 year validity certificate on our root CA, so we don't want to make that mistake again. Okay, so now I'm going to run our set util command, and I want this to be valid for 10 years, our issuing CA, and our intermediate CA is going to be 15 years, and then I copied the wrong files, and then our root CA is valid for 20 years. Okay. All right. Now we can just go back and now restart our certificate authority. I don't want to use the command line, so just stop it and then start it again. So this should now take effect. Okay, so we're done installing and configuring our intermediate CA. We have turned off our root CA because we don't need it anymore at the moment. And I will see you guys in the next session. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment sections, and I'll be willing to provide my insight. Okay, see you guys in the next session.